I've been born of earth and of heaven, and now I am here, having reached this destination, asking for knowledge. Welcome back to the Diaries of a Witch podcast. My name is Angelica Crashi, and today we're going to talk about astrology and kind of like my opinion about how I see astrology as a part of my spiritual practice. I feel like this is a topic that I've been wanting to cover for a long time, and I wanted to say kind of at the start of it that this is going to be one of those videos / podcast episodes that is a little bit more based in my personal beliefs, my personal synthesis, the way that I think about things. And in no way does this mean that this is the way that you need to think about the world or, you know, the universe or the cosmology. You do not have to agree with me. You can agree with some things. You can take what resonates and leave what doesn't, right? But it's something that I wanted to discuss because I think, especially when I'm speaking to people who are really interested in astrology or practice astrology and who are also like pagans or, just practitioners of witchcraft in general, which, not all pagans are witches and vice versa, right? But sometimes I'll find pagans or witches who are into astrology, and astrology is sort of something that can be seen as part of a spiritual, even like liturgical outlook. And that's definitely the case for me, but it's just not something that I hear people talk about as much, or I will like talk to people about astrology and sort of how they view astrology and see it. And I'll start to think to myself like, oh yeah, like we're all kind of having like this joint, like spiritual experience, like this liturgical experience with the stars right now, and like there's something to that, and there's something to the practice of viewing astrology sort of through a lens of devotion. I think where I will begin with this is talking about how I am somebody who really likes cycles. Last week we had Frankie on, and Frankie, Chaotic Witch Aunt, was talking about kind of following the Italian agricultural cycle, which I love, and I think that's so cool. And that's kind of what I like to do in a way in my practice as well, just like following these cycles of, I would say, predominantly seasons. And I think part of the reason why that resonates with me so much is because I work with Hades and Persephone, and so there's very much an obvious like seasonal cyclical connection there, of course. But the other type of seasons, if you want to like think about it like that, or the other cycle, is the cycle of the stars. There's a very famous Hermetic axiom that says, as above, so below. And essentially what that means is, whatever's going on in the sky and the stars is reflected here on Earth. There's also this other kind of like cosmological scheme called the spheres, the heavenly spheres. You may have heard of this. It's a very popular thing. Aristotle talks a ton about the spheres. They're often referred to as like the Aristotelian spheres. And essentially what it is this idea that we have the earth, and the earth is made up of the four elements. And so sort of the elements, or the four seasons, or the cycles, create the environment of the earth realm. And then we have the lunar sphere, the sphere of the moon, which kind of surrounds the earth. It's sort of like, I think of it as like the Earth's atmosphere. And sometimes anything below like the lunar sphere, that is like the earthly sphere. So anything below the lunar sphere is often regarded as like of the earth, of the material world. So chthonic deity and the chthonic realms are sort of considered to be a part of that earthly space. So oftentimes they're referred to as sublunar, but so is the earth, right? So in the kind of scheme of this, like the chthonic realms and the earth realms are part of the same sphere. if that makes sense. Dante kind of disagrees with me on that, and that's sort of what the the realms and the what does he call them, the circles of hell. I like how he took like the spheres and then he's like, the spheres of heaven and the circles of hell. Like, okay, Dante. But they're still sublunar, they're still under the lunar sphere, which is the first of the heavenly spheres. Anyway, now that we've established that. Then the spheres will ascend from there, and the final sphere of the planets is the sphere of Saturn. And then above Saturn are the fixed stars. And there's a couple other spheres that continue to go up. This entire scheme is something that a lot of astrologers are really interested in, find really fascinating, the sort of geocentric scheme of the spheres. It's very popular in different types of religious contexts. You know, there's like a lot of discussion of the spheres in kind of like medieval Christianity and whatnot. But one of the things that the spheres can give us is this sort of way of understanding how we ought to like live through our life experience and our life process. The idea of like the ascent through the spheres is basically about the soul gaining knowledge, gaining understanding. A lot of ceremonial magicians or just like ceremonial magic traditions will almost like use the spheres as a way of understanding initiation of the soul. The first sphere is the sphere of the moon, right? And that represents like birth. It links directly to the earth realm and the material world, but it also is kind of the passageway up into the heavens. And the final sphere of Saturn is of death and of old age. And there's even a variety of different astrological like lifespan systems of like understanding the lifespan through the ascension of the spheres, through the gaining wisdom of the spheres. So when you are in your old age, you are sort of in the age of Saturn. When you are a baby, you are in the age of the moon, and you know, it kind of goes up from there. It sort of creates this precession idea of how the planets can help us live our lives, how the planets can get us from the start of our lives to the end of our lives. Astrology is one of those tools that can really help you like understand things like fate, what you are here on this planet to do. And again, you could think about it from a really like spiritual perspective, or you could just think about it sort of in a more mundane way where, okay, the planets and the influences that you are born under, like the astrological influences that you are born under, are probably going to impact, if you believe in astrology, the way that you approach the world, the way that you approach career, the way that you make a mark on the world. So whether you believe it's sort of predestined or just a result of being as above so below, being under the influence and under the auspices of the planets, whatever they were doing at the time of your birth, it kind of equates to the same thing, if that makes sense. You know, it has the same results of understanding your fate through the lens of, you know, your birth chart, your astrology chart. But there are all these other ways to think about how the planets, how astrology, how whatever is going on up there is reflecting down here on us. And the spheres are one of the ways to understand that and to acknowledge that. There's a mythological birth chart of the universe called the Thema Mundi, which I love. And in this mythological birth chart of the universe is a Cancer rising at 15 degrees Cancer. Cancer, which is the only sign that the moon rules, is sort of seen as the literal like entrance into the world, the birth of the world. It is the ascending sign of the entire universe, right? So it represents the incarnation experience. And then the opposite sign from Cancer is Capricorn, which is a Saturn ruled sign. If you think about it as well, it's like the two solstices, right? The solstice points. The summer solstice is kind of like the incarnation point where, you know, things are born and created. And then the winter solstice is sort of the passing point where you pass from the sphere of Saturn into the, you know, sphere of the fixed stars, and you are kind of like released back into divinity. This entire philosophy, this entire idea, both of maybe like the death and rebirth cycle, reincarnation, being released to the gods, into the cosmos after you die, this as well as just the idea that the earth, like the sublunar realm, the essentially like the elemental world, Gaia, and the upper world, Uranos, the sky, the cosmos, there is this idea, obviously, that things come from and descend from Uranos and Gaia, right? The two, like the mother and the father of the cosmos and of our earth and our world. There are countless mentions in Greek mythology, Greek cosmology, about how Gaia and Uranos come together and create the Titans. And then from the Titans, the Olympians are created. Even humans, even mortals, we are descendants of the Titan gods as well. There are so many different kinds of stories about like how humans are created. But a thread that we see in so much of Greek myth and cosmology is humans coming from Gaia, humans coming from the like bones of Gaia, it's often depicted as, or from the dirt, which is like Gaia's body, and we are created from that. There's another idea that the Titans in Tartarus create mortals and essentially like ascribe purposes and souls to those mortals, like with the fates, and then we are reborn and kind of like thrust out of the underworld, and we're just supposed to be now on the earth with our fate and with our bodies that the Titans have created for us out of Tartarus. So what I'm trying to say is there's very much this link between the earth and the sky, the underworld and Olympus, this connection of the earthly realm and like the chthonic realm, the sublunar realm in general, and then the spheres and the cosmos at large, right? I think a lot of pagans kind of resent the idea of like a sky or like a heaven focused cosmology or like religious viewpoint. I think that the idea of like sky daddy, like think about the term sky daddy, right? Like this is just a term that we associate constantly with like the Christian God, I think that's why a lot of pagans are really interested in the deities of the earth, or chthonic deities, deities that just feel really connected to the material world and the earth experience. And I feel the same way. I mean, the majority of the deities that I work with are chthonic deities that are very much associated with the sublunar realm, the material world, the earthly realm, the underworld. But I also believe that the earth, Gaia, and the sky, Uranos, are connected, and they kind of can't exist without each other. Like if the sky just disappeared, if the stars in the sky disappeared, we would lose so many important titans that are really like the foundation of our universe, like literally, right? I mean, if we didn't have the sky around our planet, like what would our planet even exist? Like, I don't know. Like, even thinking about it, not in a science-y way, but like from the perspective of this Greek cosmology, like, would it even exist? I don't know. So we can't just focus on the very material gods of the four elements and of the sublunar realm. We have to also kind of at least consider the divinities and the deities who are beyond that. And astrology is one of my ways of connecting to and understanding those rhythms. So as I understand and connect to and celebrate the rhythms of the seasons, of the four elements, of Hades and Persephone, these two, I consider them to be like the king and the queen of the earth. They're the king and the queen of the earth realm and the underworld realm, in my opinion. So celebrating them, but also working with the transits and the different like ingresses of the planets and the movement of the planets. The word planet means wanderer, and they are these bodies that are just sort of like wandering in the sky. And there are mythologies that connect to each of the zodiac signs, and there's lots of different origins of the zodiac signs. There's like the ancient Babylonian origins. There are Greek stories that talk about, the certain constellations in the sky and the myths that are associated with them. But the idea is essentially that Zeus, or sometimes other deities, rise these creatures or these animals or these people up into the sky to celebrate them, to honor what they have done so that we can see them and view them. And maybe at the end of our lives, just like Zeus honors heroes and people and creatures who have done well and lived their fate and impressed him and the gods, they're risen up into the sky and they become a part of that after exiting the sphere of Saturn. This is an analogy for the idea of living well, for living in accordance with your fate. And if we think about it, like that fate is set by the fates, and it is also set by the very stars that are in alignment at the time of the incarnate's birth. So the fates, who are in the underworld, and the stars are kind of now connected by this idea that like both in tandem, or maybe their influences are the same, are creating this. Same with the titans in the underworld who create mortals and, kind of ship them out to the earth with their fates intact. That is all happening in the underworld, but it's also something that we know happens from the sky. So the way that I understand all this and sort of like my personal belief system and kind of what I'm trying to argue here is that the earth realm and the sky, the underworld and the sky are very deeply connected. And I think as somebody who works a lot with the underworld and the chthonic deities, you might not think that I am interested at all in the sky, but what I do is I honor the cycles of the stars and the wandering planets and those movements as these divine movements of fate. And I see the precession of the planets as sort of like the constant weaving of fate here on Earth. And I think that's something that we often don't feel from the deities who are so ancient and so ephemeral. That's what I love about astrology, is I have the basis of my spiritual perspective, which is sort of rooted in these gods and understanding the universe from their personalities and these ephemeral perspectives. But I also love that astrology works within this entire system and gives me the ability to sort of like connect with the divine and track the movements of fate. That's really how I see it on a daily basis. And I get to take my birth chart, which has sort of been ascribed to me at the time of birth. It is something you could think about it as, something that will last my entire life. One thing, one prophecy that will be carried with me my entire life. If you think about like the gods and what they signify, those are the things that they carry through their entire immortal life. So the way that I think about my birth chart as a mortal being is it is what I carry in this life. These are my significators. This is what, I rule over or rules over me. These are the things, kind of like Hades rules over the underworld. If I look to my birth chart, these are the things that in my lifetime, me, Angelica, this is what I'm doing. It's ephemeral in a lot of ways, at least for the length of my life. And then these stars and the sky, and then the astrology is shifting and changing on a day-to-day basis, sometimes even on a minute-by-minute basis, depending on what you're tracking. And that aligns me and helps me live out and experience things that have already been written in my birth chart, and experience them maybe to the highest potential that they can be experienced. And that is what the movement through the spheres means to me. It's the initiation of each of the planets. It's working in alignment with what's going on for me natally, what's going on transit-wise, and that is my initiation up through the spheres. The way that the Orphics thought of it, or the sort of like Orphic perspective of this idea, is that when you die, kind of no matter of how many lives you lived or really what happened, when you die, after you were initiated into the Orphic mysteries, you were given sort of like a list of instructions on how to streamline this idea of becoming like the gods, of living an immortal life, being able to access all of the understanding and the knowledge that the divines have. And this was through drinking the water of the Nemazine pool in the underworld. You would essentially be instructed as an Orphic initiate to find the Nemazine pool in the underworld and to drink from it. And the thing that you would say in order to allow passage from like the assistants and the guardians of the Nemesis pool in the underworld, the thing that you would say to them is, I am a child of earth and starry sky. That was sort of like the password or the declaration that would make it so that you didn't drink from the Lethe pool and got reincarnated. You drank from the Nemesis pool and you got to live in Elysium, or you got to live in the Blessed Isles, or you got to essentially be like the gods in the sense that your consciousness was expanded and you thought like them, you saw like them, you had this almost like total knowledge and understanding that they do. And the idea of the phrase, I am a child of earth and starry sky, the whole kind of belief behind that, and scholars do argue about exactly what they're trying to say here, but for me, it is this declaration that I am a child of Uranos and Gaia, just like you, just like all the gods, you know? The Titans are literally descendants of Uranos and Gaia. Humans are quite literally born of the Titans, born of Uranos and Gaia. And the idea of it not just being like, oh, I'm born of Gaia, I'm earthborn. The idea of it is I am born of Gaia and of Uranos. I have lived and incarnated on the earth, and I've moved through the spheres. I have learned the lessons of fate as dictated to me by the planets. I have been born of earth and of heaven, and now I am here, having reached this destination, asking for knowledge, asking for the essential, like the God consciousness to be bestowed upon me. And this is a very similar almost analogy to what happens, allegedly, who knows, when you reach the sphere of Saturn. So I see it, you didn't ask, but I see it as this complete cycle. We are born, we are on the earth, we move through the spheres. I think that we're not necessarily moving upwards, we're just kind of like moving through this cyclical phase. And then when we come back down through the sphere of Saturn, we are going back into the underworld where this is taking place. So this is really trippy, but you could also think about it as quite literally the sphere of Saturn and all the celestial spheres above that kind of fade into the underworld, and then they kind of come back out again with Earth and go around and around and around. Really trippy. I feel like you could really make a cool poster with that. We won't, because this is just what Angelica thinks. This is what I think when I'm high. I'm just like, yeah, what if it's all cycles? That was like a really surprisingly long-winded way of describing that. I did not think I was going to talk about that today. I thought I was just going to talk about how Venus retrograde makes me feel connected to the divine. But I guess that explanation of what I think about how it all connects, I guess maybe I needed to say that. I guess it was necessary for this episode and this podcast. I feel like sometimes on this show we do stuff like this where we're like talking about Lupercalia really in depth, or we're talking about fucking Orphic cosmology or whatever, really in depth, and then sometimes we're just like shooting the shit and not really talking about anything in particular. So thank you to all the listeners who are down for the deep dives and the kind of more shallow, funny content that that we do on here sometimes. So now I want to talk, after we've done all that, now I want to talk about how I practically and actually like work with astrology as a spiritual force, or in my day-to-day life. Something else I should say is I don't believe necessarily that like the planet and the god are the same thing. I know that might like complicate what I'm saying even more. Like you're like, whoa, Angelica, you're literally linking this to like Greek cosmology, and then you don't believe that that Venus is Aphrodite and vice versa, like the planet versus the god. It's so like hard to describe, and I genuinely don't know, because I am a mortal person. Like I don't know. I can't really tell you either way. But the way that I like intuitively understand it is the planets are these forces, these objects, these like celestial bodies that are sharing in the significators of a lot of their deities that they're named after, and vice versa. Do I believe that they are like Venus is a big gaseous planet floating up there in space. No, I don't believe that. But I believe that like they share the same significators. And there are plenty of kind of ways of understanding this too, where it's like there are two things that have the same significators and they're different, but they're connected. And so that's what I think about the planets, is they're not the deities, but they are connected and they work with and honor sort of the same archetypes, the same things that they rule over, rulerships, etc. And if you are somebody who works with astrology and you follow astrology, you have probably felt at some point in your life something going on in the sky that you are really feeling down here on Earth. Like it really reflects, like the Hermetic axiom is coming through. It is happening. In the astrology world, we often call this good astrology, where maybe it's not like good, like objectively, but the astrology is good. Like, okay, the pattern that I would expect to be seeing is happening, and thus the astrology is good. The pattern is working, essentially. So if you have experienced that before, you know that it just feels kind of like this spooky spiritual force that you just can't understand. Or let's say like maybe you're a witch and you've had spells manifest in your life before, and you kind of know what I'm talking about, where like the spell is manifesting in your life, and at first maybe you don't even recognize it, or it doesn't even show up, like you don't even think about it as, oh, this is my spell. It's just like the way that the world is unfolding for you. And then eventually it hits you like, holy shit, this is exactly what I asked for, or this is the spell manifesting. That's how astrology feels to me as somebody who follows it. Is something is going on in my life and I'm like, oh my God, this is word for word, poetically exactly what's going on in the sky, like to a scary degree, right? And this is also what happens when I connect with deities, right? Like sometimes I will ask Hades for a sign, or, you know, I'll be doing a petition with him or something, or maybe I don't even ask him for anything, but he just shows up in this really palpable way in the world for me. And it's really like paranormal and it's very strange. And maybe at first it was kind of like existing within my experience, and then at some point it shifted and I recognized it for like this divine, paranormal, crazy, wild experience that it was, right? So essentially what I'm trying to say is the way that I interact with deities and spells and witchcraft and magic and astrology and all of these forces feels very similar. The way that they start to filter in and fade into my reality and make themselves known feels very similar. So I really regard the movement of the planets and of other astrological events as spiritual events that are going on in my life. And of course they reflect back mundane things, but that's another reason why I think that it's so fun and it's such a great way to connect with the divine. The fact that you can think about Mercury retrograde as like this sacred cycle. So when I'm frustrated that my car is, you know, breaking down or something, I can think about it as like, okay, well, this is sort of going in alignment with some pattern that is up there, right? And maybe it is interacting with my life in a way to teach me something or to bestow something upon me, or maybe not. Maybe it's just a way for me to witness the world, exist in the world, and also see the world as connected to something bigger. And I think that that's what we're all trying to do as people who are interested in spirituality or witchcraft or magic or any of these things, right? People who are interested in theurgy, you know, we want to connect with the divine. And that's what theurgy is it's about ways that you can connect through yourself to the divine. The idea of moving up through the spheres is a theurgical process. And we just equated the idea of moving up through the spheres as literally like living through your life. And so living through your mundane life, if you allow yourself to think about it this way, is also a spiritual theurgical process. It's you connecting with the divine. And so what I'm trying to say here is that astrology gives you another cycle to follow that connects you to the rhythms of the universe, into the rhythms of the divine. And I think even more so than the seasons, which are kind of like always the same and like it's sort of more repetitive, even more than that, the astrology really gives you like these dynamic day-to-day shifts that, again, show you how your life is unfolding, show you how you can more deeply sink in and connect with and have a theurgical relationship to the divine. I think that a lot of people feel this way, but maybe don't recognize that they feel this way. And so I present like all this information as a way, potentially, especially maybe if you resonate with Greek cosmology, of understanding how it all works together. Because again, I think that there really is like almost this recoiling of the idea of like the heaven or the sky above us, just because of Christianity and that sort of thing. But look at the stars up there and tell me that they're not pagan. Look at the fucking temples that were built where certain times of year they would align with certain fixed stars or the sun, and tell me that that's not this gorgeous, beautiful pagan practice. I don't know. I mean, they're all named after pagan deities. They're mythologically based. Like, I don't know. I'm not trying to say that like Christians are really into astrology either, because they're not. At least I don't think so. I don't think they're into it. But I don't know. I do see a discrepancy between pagans and witches and astrologers. I feel like the majority of the astrologers that I know would not identify as witches, would not identify as pagan. And maybe they would identify as like being occultists, because there is a long history of like using astrology and planetary spirits in, ceremonial magic and in the Western esoteric tradition. So a lot of them will identify as occultists or even like magicians, but they don't really like see the deep like pagan spirituality behind it. And as somebody who started off as a pagan, like I was a pagan practitioner before I was doing spells. Like I was just really, really oriented to paganism before I was even interested in witchcraft. And then astrology came way after that. As somebody who experienced astrology through the lens of paganism and witchcraft first, I have always seen astrology as like this super divine pagan spiritual thing. And I often will connect with astrologers, or like I'll go to conferences and I'll meet with other astrologers, and there are people that are vibing on the same, wavelength that I'm vibing on, of course, but I will talk to so many people where they're like, no, I don't think about it at all in reference to my spiritual practice. And I'm like, what? Like how? Like how can you not? So I just wanted to do this episode to kind of explore this part of my belief system, to talk about it, and to kind of bring some like representation to the table of like pagans who also work with astrology as a spiritual force. So yeah, before I end this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit more about like how I work with this on a day-to-day basis. We talked a lot about like just the general, like my general philosophy on this, but essentially how it works, right? And there's so many ways that I could approach this, but I really like to, on a weekly basis, work with the planetary days, and sometimes I work with them in a very like spell worky, thaumaturgical kind of way, where I'm like, okay, it's Jupiter day, woo, gotta make some money, or ooh, it's Venus day, gotta like do some money magic, right? Or do some love magic or whatever. Sunday, let's do some glamour magic. But another way that I can think about it is just like, okay, this day is under the auspice and the rule of this planet. And then I start thinking like, okay, what is this planet doing right now? How happy is this planet in the sky? Like, oh, it's Mercury day and Mercury is retrograde. I might not get as much done today as I thought I was going to, but that's okay. Or, oh, it's, Venus day and Venus is retrograde. This is a great day for me to connect with and journal about and reflect on my relationships and my communication style and my values. So it's sort of about like working with the planets in real time around what they're doing. And you could do it sort of as they move through the sky, or you can, work with it through each of the planetary days as corresponding to that planet and their significators and their mysteries. So one thing that I really like to do is whenever a planet ingresses into a new sign, which ingress means like enter into a new sign, I like to recite the Orphic hymn that corresponds to the deity that, is named after the planet and whatnot. Or, for example, if Mercury's retrograde and you want to work with the energy of Mercury, maybe like you have to do some writing or you want to sign a contract or you want to do something that like otherwise you feel like you wouldn't normally do that during Mercury retrograde period, you can use the Orphic hymn or devotions to Mercury, or maybe you light a candle for Mercury or Hermes, and you work with him and you connect with him almost like in a deity work basis, right? Connecting with the deity that is connected to the planet, and it can help to alleviate some of the maybe more frustrating stuff that could come up in Mercury retrograde. I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it interesting, and I'd be kind of curious to know like what your thoughts are on this. I'm sure a lot of you are going to disagree with me or just be like, I love this, but it's not for me, which is amazing and totally fine. And then I feel like there might be folks who are interested in this idea, or like maybe it's something that you believe, but you didn't even necessarily realize that you were thinking about it this way. So let me know what you think. Later this month, I'm doing a deity workshop in the Patreon. This is happening in the Coven tier exclusively. You can also buy a drop-in ticket as well, by the way, through Patreon. So check it out. But the deity workshop is going to be so fun because we're going to be talking about how to go from feeling disconnected to a deity, or maybe like you were never really able to connect with them that well in the first place, to feeling like you're in a really secure relationship with that deity, to expanding that relationship. So we're essentially going to be doing this entire workshop on April 26th. It's a Saturday at noon Eastern time. We're going to be focusing this entire workshop on how to grow in a really dynamic way your relationships with pagan deity, and how to maybe even improve or go from feeling disconnected and insecure to feeling a little bit more secure and dynamic in these relationships. So that's what we're doing later this month in Patreon in the Coven tier. And if you enjoy this podcast, if you enjoy my work, consider joining my Patreon to get access to exclusive content, blog posts, live events, so many things that we do every single month. And speaking of my amazing patrons, I wanted to give a shout out to my members in the Coven and Diary tier. Thank you so much, Jamie, Cheryl, Emma, Alexis, Alessandra, Ashley, Luna, Taylor, Jordan, Chelsea, Megan A, Megan M, Natalie, Jen, Carrie, Lauren, Kayla, Lindsay, Sarah, Quinn, Peony, Joanna, Megan S, Megan R, Callie, Nina, Irene, Chelb, Haley, Kristen, Desiree, Emmy, Hannah, Georgia, Adri, Liz, Kay, Esty, Kristen, Shell, Veronica, Isabella, Lanes, Junie, Elena, Teddy, Paige, Shania, Crystal, Mina, Kimberly, Finian, Barbie, Lucy, Amber, Madeline, Katie, Laura, Orja, and my newest member, Lara. And thanks so much for listening. We will talk soon. Bye!